Well, if there's one thing that the 2020 Democratic presidential election field proves is that Democrats, at least at the top levels, have shifted too far to the left. Wait till you hear who said that. I'm Scott Ott with Stephen Green and Bill Whittle. And gentlemen, it is the former Senate Democratic leader, Harry Reid, who has come out of retirement, risen from the grave, however you want to look at that, who apparently sat for an interview, I believe, with Vice, which is just perfect. Anyway, and he's saying now that the Democratic candidates he sees on the national stage are too extreme for voters. Two issues, Stephen Green, when it comes to this that drew his particular ire. One is the idea of open borders and decriminalizing illegal immigration. Is Harry Reid just a stodgy old fart who doesn't understand the modern Democratic Party? Or is he a warning that they should listen to or that they would ignore at their own peril?
Embrace the healing power of and, Scott. He can certainly be both. Absolutely. Look, Harry Reid is an old school Democrat, and he understands that you have to get elected before you can raid the Treasury. Okay? He's very, very skilled, experienced, whatever you want to say, at doing just that. I mean, this is a guy who entered the Senate worth approximately nothing and exited worth how much? A lot. So he knows what he's talking about, and it seems like other Democrats seem to be taking notice. Kamala Harris and a couple other candidates that I can't remember off the top of my head are already starting to back away from the Medicare for All promise that they were all just on the debate stage promising just a couple 3 weeks ago, and in the debates the month before that. Apparently, it's not polling well, even with Democratic primary voters, because, as I said, they're backing away from this. Now, it's going to be fairly easy for them to back away from Medicare for All, because if you watched this last presidential debate, each candidate got so bogged down in the boring, grim, awful, dull, tedious details of each one of their plans. I mean, it was a debate for wonks, and I couldn't keep up. Well, as on purpose, I was drinking heavily. But it's just, it's very easy to back away from a complicated plan. You can say, oh, well, in subsection B, paragraph A, when I said this, what I really should have said was this. Or we've decided that if we concentrate more on section 2, subparagraph L, I think you'll get a bit. So that kind of thing is very easy to back away from, because nobody understood what the hell they were talking about in the first place. What's going to kill him, I think, is that New York Post cover of all the candidates raising their hands like obedient school children about whether they would support free health care for illegal immigrants. And how do you back away from the image of every single one of you doing this when Chuck Todd, who really should have known better because, he's part of their team, Chuck Todd asking them that question and to raise their hands. The optics are so simple that I think even Democratic primary voters can get them.
Bill, that was the other big thing that Harry Reid talked about. It's not just this idea of decriminalizing the border, because basically Reid said, look, the vast majority of the American public, not even the vast majority of Democrats, are in favor of just completely open borders. But he said any candidate who backs this idea of a single-payer health care plan is going to have problems as the nominee next year. And he uses this phrase that just seems, I don't know, kind of charming, quaint, call it that. Harry Reid said, how are you going to get it passed?
Use the Reid option.
Oh.
Use the Reid option.
Would you like to elucidate, expand on that?
I would. And before I do, let me just say something briefly about Harry Reid, because I might end up saying something nice about him accidentally. There are old politicians, and there are people that have been in the Senate for 50 years, and there are guys like I happen to feel the same way more or less about Mitch McConnell, basically, in terms of their pulse on the throbbing beat of America's culture. But Harry Reid I just think is an evil guy. I just think he's an evil, evil guy. I heard he was different before the war, but his experience at Gettysburg really changed him. And so who knows? In any event, I just had to get that out there. I was rather fond of that. Look, the nuclear option was the idea that there is a gentleman's agreement that lasted for well over 100 years in the Senate that a filibuster would require a 60-vote majority to overturn. And it has been a gentleman's agreement forever. And basically what it has done is it has made sure that the most difficult and the most contentious problems that the Senate has to face have to be won by enough of a majority to beat the 60-40 instead of 51-49. And it was a good plan. And to basically say that we don't really have to do this, it's just an agreement. That was called the nuclear option, where you would basically nuke the filibuster and you're just left with smoking ruins. Well, Harry Reid needed that vote on something I can't even remember. So he hit the button and destroyed the filibuster. And now I call it the Reid option because he's the guy who basically did it, who pushed the button that fired all this stuff. And because of Harry Reid pushing that button, we have things like Justice Gorsuch, Justice Kavanaugh, all of these things that they might have been able to block before. As far as what he said about here is concerned, well, he's right, obviously. And almost like I said, I almost said something positive about him, but he's actually, I think in this case, I think he's right for the right reasons. I think he understands that this is not, that if you want to make the entire election about victimology and identity politics and giving away stuff, you're going to lose the traditional base of the Democratic Party, large numbers of whom went to Donald Trump in 2016, which gave him the win in the blue wall states, and which I see as being far more likely to vote for him now than last time. So he's right, but he won't be listened to. And this is the thing that I'm actually kind of, I won't say enjoying, but I think is hopeful. This progressive philosophy of top victim and most virtue signaling can't end. It has to constantly be topped if you want to get attention. And so if somebody is claiming, I think we should give free health care to illegal immigrants, then somebody else is going to have to say, not only that, I think we should offer free sex change operations to illegal immigrants who do all this. And it just never ends. So it gets further and further and further out into left field, and Harry Reid knows left field real well.
I think Harry Reid represents a large number of Democrats, not just the rank and file that Bill was talking about, but frankly, Democratic politicians who've sort of are biting their tongues during the course of this primary race because they know ultimately the party's nominee won't be where some of these candidates are now. They simply won't be able to put together the kind of coalition they need to get elected by going to the extremes the way they have. However, as we've talked about on a previous episode, in the Democratic Party, and perhaps in the Republican Party as well, you really have to push these extremes to get the kinds of people who show up for primary elections. To show up. These are the extremists. There's a small percentage of the general electorate, a small percentage of the registered Democrats are the ones who have an axe to grind, who have a cause that they celebrate, and they want to find candidates who will wave the banner for those causes. Ultimately, Harry Reid is going to endorse one of these people, and as Steve pointed out, it's going to be somebody who raised their hand and basically said, we would like to provide government-funded health care for illegal immigrants. One of those people is going to be the nominee, and Harry Reid will endorse one of those people. But there is something to be said for a way of life that they've mocked Joe Biden for in the U.S. Senate, and that is a kind of gathering for debate and collegiality and what one might call statesmanship. Now, as you've seen with Harry Reid, it's kind of an ex post facto statesmanship. It's not something that was manifest while he was the leader of the Senate Democrats as much as it is now when he has the leisure of not having to run for re-election or be thumped by members of his own party. And so it can come across as a little disingenuous, but I'm going to give this one to Harry Reid because I don't really care what his motivations are. I think that he's giving wise counsel to his party, and the only comfort I take in all of this is the fact that he'll be ignored. For Bill Whittle and Stephen Green, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members at BillWhittle.com for making Right Angle possible.